Welcome everybody to the first episode of the Gaming Report, your stop for the important gaming news that will affect your lives. My name is Left Stick and I will be the master of ceremonies for this episode. If you like this and you want to see more of it, make sure you go right down under this video and like and subscribe. It doesn't take much effort and you'll get the happy feeling that you helped a small channel to grow. I really do appreciate you lending me your time. Please note, all links to the stories I used in preparing this video will be in the description. Dead or Alive 5 Last Round Season Pass number 7. A new Season Pass is always a gamble. Usually you're running the risk that the money you're paying will go towards extending the life of the initial investment of the game. I guess if you squint really hard, the new Season Pass for Dead or Alive 5 does that for a special kind of player. Having given up the pretense that Dead or Alive is anything more than a dress-up game for gamers of certain persuasions, for $74.99 you can place your bets on a couple of months of new outfits for the characters. No new modes. No new characters, just outfits. For digital ladies. If you look at the DLC on whatever storefront you frequent, there's already nearly $1,000 of outfits and such. Each of the other 6 season passes, and the strangely named Ultimate Pass will run you about $94.99, so this one's almost a steal. I guess there's enough of an audience for this DLC or there wouldn't be so much. I still remember the outcry from players of Oblivion where they were offered horse armor for like $5. That was the earliest days of DLC when it was still a thrill to have a console that could be plugged into an internet connection. And that could be forgiven, written off as the early steps into a new and strange world of content that could be delivered to a consumer piecemeal. Since then there have been many slimy practices that have been tried and are still being tried today. On-disc DLC, endings as DLC, the list goes on and on. The worst of these are cosmetics. If cosmetics microtransactions are priced reasonably, I'd say like $1, but they're never that low. Cosmetics are a decent add-on purchase like the candy rack in front of any cash register. Team Fortress 2 has found great success with this, even though buying the chest and then a key for 2 separate prices is really slimy, even though it's free to play, and I do know people who've spent nearly $1,000 worth of money on hats, weapon skins, and such. But I knew it was a matter of time before somebody took cosmetics to a new low. If $74.99 were the only piece of the puzzle, I maybe could write it off as, whatever. There are people who like this. But add in the cost of the other DLC season passes and individual costumes, not to mention the delisted outfits, leads this practice into evil territory. There's no reason for this much money needing to be spent for the complete experience. Surely there are people buying this stuff, or it wouldn't continue to be in the industry. It makes money for the publishers, so much that the biggest games of the industry have moved towards various cosmetics or fast unlocks through loot boxes or premium currency or whatever. In a free game that makes sense, because these kind of games need to make money somehow. They don't make games out of the kindness of their heart. Don't worry about the fact that they prey on people with the predilection towards gambling or impulse control issues. For an already $60 game, it's unnecessary and outlandish. I'm not trying to bash people who like to spend money on these kind of things. How people spend their money is their own business, but almost $1,000 of ones and zeros is something I can't even begin to imagine. I feel resources that are being put into these cosmetics could be a better investment and a better value if spent with extending the actual gameplay of the game, and it may be cheaper. Imagine, if you will, instead of hundreds of dollars of dresses, Koei Tecmo spent the resources on new characters and making the game the most balanced fighting game ever released. The money that could be brought in from EVO and tournaments would be huge. The fighting players would flock towards it like flies in a garbage dump. But as it stands, it is a fairly competent fighter that makes me feel dirty playing it, and that's a real shame. And speaking of fighting games adding characters, Hellboy, Raiden coming to Injustice 2. The Game Developers Conference was this week in San Francisco, California, and as expected, NetherRealm Studios announced the fighters that will be included in the Fighters Pack 2, continuing the tradition of fighting games adding DLC characters into their game to keep players playing. 3 characters for the first Fighters Pack were well received by players and included Batman villain Red Hood, Mortal Kombat mainstay Sub-Zero, and the Teen Titan Nightfire. Because of such a warm reception of the first Fighters Pack, the pressure was on Warner Bros. Studios and NetherRealm to deliver another set of popular characters. These 3 new characters are Aquaman villain Black Manta, who is set to release on September 12th according to Kotaku, Mortal Kombat protagonist Raiden, and in a surprise move, Dark Horse Comics' Hellboy. Release date for the two latter characters have not been revealed as of this video, but I would almost be willing to put money on Raiden being the next release, since both Scorpion and Sub-Zero were released in the middle of their packs, and Hellboy is the real selling point of this Fighters pack. Kotaku's Mike Fahey had this to say about the characters' release dates. Quote, "The first fighter from the pack will be available when Fighter Pack 2 goes on sale September 12th. If Fighter Pack 1 was any indication, expect the other two fighters to trickle out over the months to follow." If Dead or Alive was an example of the wrong way to do DLC, I can point to NetherRealm Studios as somebody who does it damn near right. The characters they release for both Injustice and Mortal Kombat are consistently top quality, and make great additions to what are already well-made games and are often ranked as the best characters in their games. I think the price is always a little high for my taste, but if you're DLC adverse like I am, the complete editions of these games with all characters included are great values. The one caveat I have with the DLC is Warner Bros.' insistence on adding time skip premium currency. Mortal Kombat's easy fatalities and fight skips were relatively easy to not pay attention to since they really didn't affect the game. But Injustice 2's inclusion of premium currency to buy the better equipment almost makes it pay to win if you don't want to work for the equipment. It's frustrating in any game to not know you lost because the other person had more skill, or if they paid more money. It's incredibly frustrating in a test of skill like a fighting game. I usually have a very strong no DLC content rule unless it's for a good single-player DLC for a game I really like. Although I realize that DLC has become a necessary evil for companies since game development costs have gone up, but retail prices have stayed pretty much the same. Again, I'm not advocating or putting down people who buy DLC. You do whatever makes you happy. The market always is going to cater to the biggest section they can, and people who buy DLC is the biggest portion of the gaming market. That's enough talk about DLC stuff. Let's move on to some good news. Shenmue 3 to be published by Deep Silver Games. From the official statement from the Deep Silver website, quote, Deep Silver and YestNet are excited to announce their collaboration to publish YestNet's forthcoming, long-awaited game Shenmue 3. The global publishing deal will cover the release exclusively on the PlayStation 4 computer entertainment system and PC, both physical and digital versions, end quote. Shenmue 3 is the extremely long-awaited continuation of the storied Shenmue series that was first published for the Sega Dreamcast in Japan in 1999 and released in the US in 2000. It received a sequel, first outside the US for the Dreamcast and everywhere else on the Microsoft Xbox in 2002. For those who don't know, the series is an asking for directions simulator that follows Ryu Hazuki as he travels across Asia to find Lan Di, the man who killed Ryu's father. This is accomplished while driving forklifts and looking for places that sailors hang out. It's really all much more interesting than it sounds, I promise. Shenmue 3 was announced at the Sony E3 press conference in 2015. Instead of announcing the release, though, it was announced that the making of the game would be crowdfunded on Kickstarter. Quickly, Shenmue broke all sorts of records as the demand for another entry has been building for years. By the end of the 30-day campaign, it had accumulated over $6 million, gave it the title of the highest funded game up to that point on the Kickstarter platform. The campaign was not without controversy, however, as many criticized the perceived lack of transparency for where the funds were going, as the original funding goal, only $2 million, whereas the previous game had cost much more than that. There is speculation that the Kickstarter was only to judge interest in a new Shenmue entry to some anonymous company, perhaps even Sony itself, that was secretly funding the rest of the development. There was never any confirmation on the theories, however. Shenmue 3 having a publisher that is going to see to the physical release is great for those of us who, for whatever reason, did not back the Kickstarter, and therefore may have missed out on purchasing a physical copy. Deep Silver has proven itself to be a top-tier publisher after publishing the Saints Row series after THQ declared bankruptcy. The only bad news is that the game has been delayed a year to the second half of 2016, but honestly, after waiting over 15 years for this game, another year isn't the end of the world. I for one am still excited to see where Ryo's journey takes him. And now on to a tech story. SNES Classic pre-orders difficult. Alright, here we go again. Please keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times, and if you have any weakness to Nintendo shenanigans, please don't ride this ride. The Super NES Classic went on pre-order this week at several retailers. The Super NES Classic is the follow-up to Nintendo's plug-and-play NES Classic that was unable to keep up with demand last year, and now the originally $50 console is going for 4 to 5 times that amount from scalpers. I mean, third-party sellers. If you thought Nintendo had learned their lesson and anticipated demand and raised stock to meet that demand, spoilers, you'd be wrong. Haven't you been paying attention? At each retailer, the console had pre-ordered its initial stock in minutes. The NES Classic was so hard to find that people would stalk the website of retailers to purchase it. The Nintendo Switch still has low stock almost a year since release. The Wii also was hard to find for a long time. I don't know if that's because Nintendo doesn't have the manufacturing capability it needs, or if it's an artificial scarcity situation. Let's be honest, it's textbook artificial scarcity, which has really been Nintendo's MO for decades. For those who don't know, artificial scarcity is when a company purposefully makes too little of a product to pump up demand and create a kind of hysteria for its products. Nintendo have been doing this forever. Take Amiibos for example. The figurines come out, most are bought up and then never seen again. Sure, there are a few models that are kept in rotation, but most models are quickly bought and the kept, or worse, sold for exorbitant prices online. If you look at the prices of various GameCube games, you'll see some crazy prices on some of them because they were manufactured in such small numbers. This practice is outdated. It's from a time when people may not have known the release date for some item, but the mystique and media coverage of something being hard to get was good advertisement. These days, information not only about release dates, but anything about a product is really only a Google search away. The only real motivation that Nintendo could have for the shortages is that it wants to be collectible, but it doesn't really take into account the children who are going to want this for Christmas, or parents who want to share the games they played with their children. It only inflates the prices third-party sellers are willing to charge. Maybe someday this bubble will burst and the prices will drop, but the scarcity and popularity of the device will keep them rare and therefore only in the realm of the collector. And it's really a shame too, since the biggest selling point is Star Fox 2, which is unavailable anywhere but this device or the legally gray area of emulation, which only tilts further towards illegality now that there has been a, quote, official release. And now on to the biggest story for those of us who create or watch content for video hosting sites. H3H3 Productions wins lawsuit filed by YouTuber they parodied. H3H3 Productions is a comedy YouTube channel that specializes in sketch and reaction videos. It's run by the husband and wife duo of Ethan and Hilla Klein. They've been embroiled in a lengthy legal battle with another content creator named Matt Haas, a pickup artist who claimed, quote, copyright infringement and defamation due to a video from H3H3 reacting to a video of his that recommended picking up women using parkour. This week, the case was decided in favor of the defendants, H3H3 Productions. In a tweet after the verdict, Ethan Klein shared what he said was the best line of the trial from their lawyer. Quote, plaintiff must realize that he cannot treat well-settled law and undisputed facts like women in his videos. They will not change because plaintiff is persistent and impervious to their hostility. End quote. Mr. Haas filed the suit due to not liking what was said about him and his techniques on the reaction video. This ruling is huge for YouTube creators who use material that's not completely made by them, like a Let's Play, reviews, or reaction videos. There's been a back and forth between copyright holders and creators over what constitutes fair use. Does all copyrighted material belong to the owner, or can creators add to it to create a new thing? The verdict places a transformative work as existing under fair use. A copyright holder cannot fight it if they don't like the work, or think that they own everything that's created using that work. This is not saying you could put a whole movie on YouTube with a couple lines of your opinion tacked on at the end, but commentary about said work is fine, and using bits and pieces in your work is also fine. It's a win for creators and allows much more flexibility in what they can do in the future. So that's enough depressing news. Let's move on to the segment of the show where I give my opinion, some of it in progress, of the games I've been playing this week. It's been a pretty good week and I've got a lot to talk about. So without further ado, Sonic Mania. Sonic the Hedgehog is a weird beast. Hedgehogs aren't really known for being fast. No other series has such a loyal following of people who either love it, hate it, and then there are those of us who love the idea of it but hate it in practice. I'm in that last camp. I think only the Genesis games were any good, but don't hold up so well after many years. For some reason, the old Mario platformers, on the other hand, still hold up. So the Nintendo and Genesis console wars have long since been decided, with Nintendo on top by default. Sonic Adventure was the worst thing to happen to the series. The game itself was a decent, if unpolished, entry into the series, but the direction the series took fell further and further into a pit of incompetence. He's been a werehog, a medieval knight, and a lover of a human princess. Each Sonic entry after the 2D era and I'm also including the 2D botched throwback Sonic 4, have diminished hope that the blue blur could return to form with some modern updates. Sonic Mania is what happens when you take developers and the fan community that have an honest love and respect for the series. And that love and respect, along with a little bit of competence, shows through in each and every zone of the game. Mania revisits several of the iconic zones from the Genesis and Sega CD games, and begins to hit all the nostalgic points that one expects, then proceeds to add and subvert those expectations as the zones go on. First levels of Sonic's newest adventure return to the Green Hill Zone, the first level in the Sonic canon, showing that this new game is both the sequel and the start of a new era in Sonic history. The first act is almost exactly like the first act of Sonic 1 until you reach the end of the act, having a mini-boss jarring you away from the nostalgia, making the player realize this is not the old, but a whole new thing. Even the music begins as the music you remember, but as the stages you've played for years become more and more unrecognizable, remixes the melodies into an entirely new thing. By modern standards, the story is flimsy and threadbare, but what's there is well told without a single word being spoken. This version of Sonic is close to the newest version of the Doom Marine from the latest entry of the Doom series, a silent protagonist that instead of being a stand-in for the player, it's a character that's created through action and subtle non-verbal communication. Sonic retains all of his 90s tood in much higher definition than the 16-bit Sega console he was born on. There are even fairly small but meaningful cutscenes that advance the silent movie that is contained in the game. It's a bold new direction taken by going back to the beginning, which works better than I ever could have hoped. Score, 9 out of 10. Speaking of unconventional games with unconventional storylines, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Mental health is a slippery thing. No one's willing to doubt the big ones like schizophrenia or dementia, but depression and anxiety is seen as something someone has to get over. Psychosis is a disorder that has become a catch-all term that people use as a general put-down towards someone who acts erratically or threatening towards others. Into this maelstrom of misinformation and wrong assumptions enters the new game from Ninja Theory, which endeavors to portray psychosis in a realistic light, even though the rest of the game is firmly planted in Norse mythology. From the opening credits, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice shows its cards for the early introduction of the staff mental health consultant. This is not a game that treats mental illness the way most entertainment does, either for laughs or drama, but it was a well thought out and researched portion of Senua's personality. Senua is affected with psychosis, but it's not what defines her. She's a fully capable woman who is a fierce warrior despite her unnatural mental state. Wearing headphones allows the player to constantly hear the voices she lives with all around her, taunting and helping her in her journey into the Norse hell. She's journeying into the land of the dead to try to bargain with the god of that land for the return of her lover who has died. This is told in both short snippets of strange visions of her past and exposition from both the narrator voice and the voice of a man who joins her as a companion. She's also racing against time before a black rot reaches her head and she dies. There are various runes around that act as optional audio logs that explains the mythology and history the game occupies. From the beginning, Ninja Theory has had the goal to make a, quote, budget AAA game that has all the production values of the most polished AAA franchise with a small team and an even smaller budget. The game is download only and retails for half the price of a typical new release. On a storytelling level, it definitely hits that mark. This is a captivating game with some of the most gorgeous animations and backgrounds I've seen on PS4. Unfortunately, the gameplay is not so polished. The game is split into 3 parts, the first 2 of which can be completed in any order the player decides, and the third done with the other 2 complete. The general game loop is walk through some hallways and come to a big arena where Senua must either fight enemies or complete a puzzle to continue. The combat is a close, intimate affair with the camera pulled in close, allowing Senua to really only be able to handle one enemy at a time. The actual combat is not a progression system in the classical sense. As the player learns new combinations of moves, so does Senua. This is not really explained other than this button is light attack and this is heavy attack on the pause menu. It's a learning process for both the player and Senua. Puzzle solving, on the other hand, gets old real quickly. There are only a few of them repeated endlessly. By the end of the first hour, the solutions are all known, just steps to get there being the only challenge. If they were more varied or more sparsely implemented, the game would be much less of a chore to play. But as it stands, there's the structure for a good game that should only lead to a much better game being made at a later point. I like the idea of the mid-tier game making a comeback, where ideas and unexplored stories can be explored without studio interference and lower budgets. Hellblade, if successful, could be one of the first steps towards that goal, if only it was just easier to get through. Score, 7 out of 10. And that's been the news for the week. I hope you learned something today about the industry that all gamers are a part of. I've been your host Left Stick, and if you like this video, check out more of my videos. Also, if you want to keep up with me, smash that subscribe button down below me. And if you want to support my channel a little extra, go to my Patreon page and drop a few bucks. It'll help ease the financial burden of this crazy hobby of mine. Thank you guys so much for watching, and for Left Stick Gaming, have a great day. See you folks next time.